This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
It's always something. Always something. By the way, crap. I gotta get my glasses out. Am I gonna stop the recording to do this? Absolutely not. False start. Alright. And my internet's bugging out. We are off to a great start. Alright, let's do this. You know, just when you think, hey, I'm moving into a new place, surely they'll at least take good care of the apartment and make it look somewhat presentable when I get there, right? First impressions are everything. Yeah, of course. If you completely discount the dents in the fridge, the bad paint jobs in the bathroom, the bullet holes in the ceiling. I made up that last part, but the fridge and the bathroom stories are legit. Welcome to your new home. Never mind the fact that somebody tried to punch a hole through the refrigerator. Yeah, just ignore that, it'll be fine. Nobody's gonna ask questions. Here's the thing, I joke about it, but I mean, normally I'm not one to complain about stuff like that. I'm always of the mindset, if the water runs, the lighting fixtures work, there are no leaks, and I got a bed to sleep in, I'm good. Tie-in functioning internet service, no complaints from me. I'm a very minimalist type person. I do not need a whole lot to be satisfied. But especially if I'm going to be paying over $1,000 a month to live in this place, I like to at least be given the impression that it's worth the price they're charging for rent. I'm not even going to mention what they stuffed inside the kitchen drawers. Nah, fuck it, I will. Fake adhesive wallpaper that wasn't even cut to the right dimension. I legitimately popped. If I remember to do so, I'm going to post some pictures just so you all don't think I'm crazy. This is what they're charging now to live in apartments. In 2025. You can't get a quality room. But by golly, they'll make you pay over $1,000 to live there. On the one hand, I should be pissed off. But on the other hand, considering the amount of time that I'll be doing stuff outside the apartment, like working, for example, I mean, it's not like I'm going to be spending more than half the day inside the room. If I was living with somebody, I'd probably be pitching a fit about it more. And like I said, as long as my internet service doesn't crap out and my utilities work, I'll be content. I mean, the place I live in right now was never anything to write home about, but at least there are no visible dents and chipped kitchen sinks. Oh yeah, and drawers that weren't really on the hinges properly. You know, just the usual stuff you would expect when you walk into your brand new home. Now, the bathtub was not in good condition, but at least it doesn't look like somebody let it rot for the last 3 years. Little bit of residue buildup, but there's no rust. It'll be an adjustment, but I'll get over the imperfections eventually. For now, we're going to get into the show, and I think it'll actually be the final time I record from my old place. So the acoustic settings might sound a bit different the next time you hear my recording. But it'll still be the old 5 Starr Wrestling Report channel. The wrestling podcast nobody knows but everyone needs. Here on YouTube and Rumble on Mondays and Fridays for new shows and new content. Make sure you subscribe, comment, and give the show a like if you have not already. I mentioned on Monday that there's going to be a few upcoming changes with regard to the channel structure. Not sure how soon those adjustments will take place, but I am about 90% sure I'm going to be cutting the World Class reviews next year. Again, I'll make those announcements at a later date. Speaking of World Class, there actually wasn't a show to review this week. So it'll be another 2-part Friday episode. Last week we had a very concise episode of WCW on the Superstation. But this week we're going to make up for it, because we're going to talk about the Clash of Champions 8. We'll also review Midsouth television as well. So let's get into it and start with a proper WCW recap, as opposed to a 15-minute Saturday night episode. Like I said, Clash of Champions 8, the Fall Brawl edition, before Fall Brawl became a future WCW pay-per-view. This one took place from the Carolina Coliseum in Columbia, South Carolina. A rockin' dreadful 2,600 people in attendance for this thing. Now, I'm not sure what the seating capacity was for the Carolina Coliseum in 1989, but I can guarantee it was way more than 2,600. You just chalk that one up to the last 9 months of mismanagement and royally pissing off the fans with bad programming. Now, I know Ric Flair had just started on the booking committee by this point, but he still had some work to do in gaining a lot of fans' trust back. Mainly talking about the disenfranchised ones. Now, it wasn't all bad. Take it for what it's worth. But they did do a 4.7 rating for this thing on TBS, which I believe was the highest rated Clash they did since the previous year's September Clash in '88 at the Albany Civic Center. So they did pop a number for this thing, despite Flair only being part of the booking committee for a little over a month. Now, when it comes to this Clash, it's often remembered for the big angle that took place at the main event. Subsequently, it's also remembered for the damage it did when TBS got bent out of shape over how people responded to the angle with Terry Funk and Ric Flair. It was kind of a bittersweet ratings boost. They finally managed to get the viewership back up. Naturally, it wound up getting the company in hot water because so many people were complaining about Funk trying to kill Ric Flair in the main event. Probably would have been better off with less people seeing it. And there was a whole slew of other behind-the-scenes drama that happened not too long after the show aired. It actually wound up being one of Paul Heyman's last appearances, because he got fired shortly afterward for a big blow-up he had with Flair in the office. And because of all the complaints that flooded the network over the plastic bag debacle, that's when WCW sent out the memo to all the boys, basically barring gratuitous violence on a wrestling show that's literally about gratuitous violence. And it just sucks that all of that was transpiring around the exact same time when business was actually doing considerably well for a change. Flair was hoping to get the viewership back up. The ratings were going back up. The quality of the TV shows were getting better. But he still had the higher-ups at Turner Broadcast getting their dirty hands in the cookie jar. Fucking up everything 6 ways from Sunday. With spineless Jim Hart at the helm. Regardless, I'm not going to sit here and belabor a lot of the rest of the card. Like I said, the main event was truly the only thing that really mattered on this entire Clash event. The opener with the Road Warriors and the SST was just another one of those textbook cases of why the Road Warriors working with bigger men was never really a good idea. Remember when they feuded with the Powers of Pain back in 1987? Warlord and the Barbarian. It was never a great combination to me. Yeah, they got some decent angles out of the feud, the bench press challenge, etc. But when they made the Road Warriors vulnerable and put them in positions to have to work as the babyfaces in peril, it just totally killed their mystique. For 5 minutes or whatever it was, the action here was okay. But to have to see Hawk and Animal work with guys pretty much their size, I always hate using this word because it's so feminine, but it didn't feel like a traditional Road Warriors match. And I just couldn't get into it. The people were into it, surprisingly. And to be fair, the Road Warriors did dominate a good chunk of the action. The last minute was great because they're doing four-way spots and the usual pandemonium you would expect. And you see Paulie's telephone get thrown in the ring for the Samoans to use. But then Hawk cuts them off and uses the phone on Samu right in front of Nick Patrick, the official. He just looked at the whole scene with derp face and let the match continue so the Road Warriors could hit the Doomsday and win. It also led to a great camera shot where you see Fatu noticing that his partner is being pinned from like 3 inches away. So to make it look like he couldn't break up the pinfall in time, he legitimately made it so that his foot got tangled up in the ropes, preventing him from getting over to save Samu in time. That was excellent. He purposefully tripped and got caught in the ropes to avoid breaking up a pinfall that he could have easily saved. What a pro. But hey, I'll say this. Despite the shitty way the Road Warriors have been booked in the last year, they're still fucking over. Loyalty at its finest, ma'am. A once great main event tag team being relegated and reduced to mediocrity. But the people still cheer for them and treat them like they're a main event team. Good on them. Oh yeah, and speaking of Paulie getting fired shortly after this Clash event, here's some covert foreshadowing. The Samoans dumped Paul and left him in the ring afterwards. Not looking good for the Walrus, if I do say. So that led us to a pair of squashes that I have paid attention to. The first of which was the debut of Tom Zank, aka the Z-Man. He took on the Cuban Assassin. Man, watching Tom Zank gives me flashbacks to a conversation I had with my work colleagues the other week. Kind of a side tangent here, but it'll kind of tie hand in hand with the story. So we went to this little sandwich shop in downtown Cleveland, and as we're walking back toward the church we were working at that day, somebody in the group asked, So how would you rate that sandwich place? And very matter of fact, I just said, I would classify that as the most perfectly mediocre sandwich I've ever had. It was a basic sandwich with meat and cheese. Not even toasted. And it didn't taste bad, but there was nothing special or unique about it. That is exactly the phrase I would use to describe Tom Zank. Perfectly mediocre. And or perfectly average. Like, other than that brief run he and Pillman had as a babyface tag team in 1990, I just can never get behind Tom Zank, man. He was a guy that could do some stuff in the ring. Athletically, he was fine. Look-wise, he was fine. Personality-wise, he was fine. But there was literally nothing special about him. He ended up becoming the Marty Jannetty of the Pillman-Zank tag team, unfortunately. Zank was Jannetty and Pillman was Shawn. He was far from the worst crop of young guys they were bringing into WCW around this time. But boy, was he square and boring as fuck. I don't know. Maybe with perspective, my mind will change as I go back and relive his timeline. But I'm not betting the farm. The other squash we had was Sid Vicious going over Ranger Ross in about a minute. That's precisely what should have happened. For the record, I don't know why they played Sid's dub network music for his entrance here, but that is by far one of my favorite Can Network themes. That is a catchy-ass tune. I love that shit. I listen to that one occasionally when I need a little pick-me-up. On the topic of pick-me-ups, here's a fun little video package I aired with Missy Hyatt and Robin Green going shopping. And I definitely got picked up looking at Nancy doing her clothes shopping spree. If you know what I mean. This whole thing was just remarkably campy, yet so great at the same time. That fucking moron Rick Steiner just willingly giving away his credit card to Robin and saying, yeah, buy whatever you want. As if that was not going to end horribly. The amazing thing about it is that it's so transparent. You watch the video, it is Robin straight up telling Missy in the limousine, we're going to go shopping at the mall for clothes and jewelry, and I'm going to pick out the most expensive items I can possibly find, including a $998 necklace. On sale, by the way. So get the inflation calculator out. You can determine how much that would cost by 2025 standards. But the mind-boggling thing is, you watch the entire video, you as a viewer are supposed to watch this and think that Robin Green is still a baby face. I watched this whole thing in its entirety. I'm like, man, they are so goddamn lucky Nancy was cute as fuck. Because the only thing I could think watching was, What a gold digger. There is nothing babyface-like about anything Nancy was doing in this video. She is voluntarily taking another man's credit card and buying whatever she wants with it because, well, she can. Yet I'm also supposed to think, yeah, there's nothing suspicious about her activity here. Clearly, she's not just using Rick for his money. She is most definitely not teasing a heel turn or anything. Well, then we got the follow-up with the tag team title match. And I think it confirmed everybody's natural intuition. If you know anything about modern women in 2025. So we get the Freebirds defending the world tag titles against the Steiners. Missy and Robin are at ringside wearing their sequin $1,000+ outfits. I can only imagine that phone call Rick Steiner is going to get from his credit card company. Rick, can you explain why you racked up $10,000 on your charge card for clothes and jewelry? Oh, just letting the girls do their shopping. At that point, he might just file for bankruptcy. Be better off. So I think it was 2 weeks ago, made a passing mention about how it'll be interesting to see if Hayes and Garvin actually bother to sell for the Steiners in this match. Or if Rick and Scott have to get a little more physical than normal to get the Birds to cooperate. It was a 50-50 shot, but I'll give him credit. Hayes and Garvin were totally professional here. Now, there were a handful of clunky spots, and believe it or not, most of that was on Scotty because he was still very green by this point. You can tell there were a lot of frequent grab-a-hold calls. In other words, they needed to slow it down and give Scott a little more time to process everything. But by and large, I thought the match was okay. In fact, it was pretty good. The Birds still got to work over Rick for the heat, so they weren't selling for the entire match. The camera missed a hot tag to Scott, which hurt the fuck out of me. Of all times to go to a crowd shot on this show, they had to time it right when Rick was about to turn the tables for the babyfaces. So Scotty gets in there and does his flurry of offense. Great series of Hurricane Ranas, big lariats, the whole 9 yards. People are going nuts for Steiner's comeback. They get a near fall on Hayes, right as Garvin comes in to break it up. And then as he and Rick go to brawl on the floor, you see Scott get shot off into the ropes. And as he's running back toward Hayes, he allegedly trips and falls into Hayes' arms so he can get planted with a DDT and pinned. And I say allegedly because, well, this is where good camera work actually benefited them for a change. They strategically made sure to not show how Scott initially got tripped up. You hear JR and Jim Cornette saying that he got his foot tangled up in the bottom rope, which appeared to be the case upon first view. Though in actuality, it was something else. Something more devious. So, of course, you get the afterbirth where Scott's pointing the finger at Robin Green while Rick and Missy are confused. And Nancy's reaction to everything was great here. You see her doing the whole innocent victim act while her facial expression told a completely different story. Like she was guilty, and everybody could see through it. But they left a really good teaser for the following TV shows. Making sure not to show Nancy in the full shot here, too. Even on the replays. So even though we all subconsciously know who's responsible for all this, they didn't explicitly sell her out. At least not yet. So this is very well done. One of those rare production moments in WCW where they got something right. Unfortunately, they could not keep that hot streak going with the next match. We had Norman the Lunatic versus Brian Pillman. For some odd reason, they thought it would be neat to have Pillman accompanied to the ring by 9 high school cheerleaders. And now we see where Tony Khan got the idea for the Varsity Blondes in AEW. Yeah, remember that one time Brian Pillman Jr.'s dad came to the ring for a match with a bunch of cheerleaders? Let's do something similar, but we'll have him come out with Julia Hart. Then Julia wound up getting more over than Pillman Jr. and Garrison Cade. Or whoever his partner was at the time. I don't even remember at this point. Now, let me just say, I would not consider this match good. It was not a complete and utter train wreck. They made the most out of a pretty substandard match on paper. For 3 minutes, they had Pillman get a brief babyface flurry going on Norman, which were mostly high-risk crowd-pleasing moves. And the people were into that. They gave Norman a little bit of offense in the middle so Pillman could sell and work from underneath. Ended up making a big fiery comeback, which the crowd popped for. Then Norman tried to cut him off with some power stuff at the end. Pillman hooked the arms and grapevine Norman with a nice takedown and got the pinfall. It was about as passable as you could expect for a Norman the Lunatic match, considering the absurdity of the gimmick. The fact that Teddy Long's out there with a ridiculous oversized jail cell key. Come on. You know, obviously this entire program was designed for Pillman to go over from the beginning. The build to it sucked on television, but they at least booked the right outcome. So I won't completely poon it. I've already pooned the Norman gimmick enough in the last however many months. I'll cut him some slack. As far as Dr. Death versus Mike Rotunda goes... Oh, I'm sorry. Captain Mike Rotunda. Because they're calling him that now. Going back to that whole rant about mediocre sandwiches from earlier. Moreover, my accurate description of Tom Zank's mediocrity as a pro wrestler. This match was one of those examples of a perfectly acceptable TV match. Nothing wrong with it. Nothing remarkably standout or memorable about it. It just existed. The only thing that really stood out to me was how freakish the upper body strength of Dr. Death was. Which I guess is nothing new. There was a spot way later in the match where he went to press slam Rotunda off the top. But like it wasn't one of those press slams where he just kind of grabs the guy and tosses him off and the guy taking the bump essentially does all the work. He grabbed Rotunda, hoisted him into the air, held him there, and he basically threw him halfway across the ring. It was quite scary. And you know, we talked about the Rotunda Dr. Death story in the weeks leading up to this event. Over the summer, they kind of quietly disbanded the Varsity Club with not a lot of fanfare behind it. And while Dr. Death has gotten over as a babyface throughout that time, it just wasn't one of those higher profile face turns that they devoted a lot of attention to on TV. And considering that we reviewed a handful of matches between these guys already, I personally thought the match they had on the Saturday syndicated television was way better. This was, again, it was okay. The finish was a little quirky with Williams winning after Tommy Young basically punted Rotunda's hand off the ropes as he went to try to use it for leverage. Not really surprised to see Williams go over clean, considering how long this feud's been in the works. I know eventually they end up getting Dr. Death involved in the US heavyweight title picture with Luger, which, if I remember right, never really has a payoff because of all the shit that went down with Sting and Wrestle War next year. But that'll be a story we cover later down the road. More incoming train wrecks. On the subject of Mr. Luger and his US heavyweight title, as well as his $1 million body and multi-million dollar intellect. Well, he had his title match with Wildfire Tommy Rich. This made me laugh. Somebody in the crowd came up with a genius zinger. A sign that read, "The Untotal Package, Lex Luger." Wow. The effort that went into coming up with that smear. You call yourself the total package? Well, you're the untotal package to me, Buster Brown. Got him. That'll hurt his ego for sure. Yeah, they hurt Luger's ego so much here that the people practically cheered him through the entire match. It is unfortunate that the dynamics of the babyface heel situation was kind of backwards here. Because all things considered, it was a pretty enjoyable title match. They had some great camera work going on throughout this thing that we really haven't seen up until this point in the show. They actually had one of those little elevated platform lifts so they could sort of get an overhead view shot. That looked really cool when Luger tried for a crossbody later on but missed. And they were definitely getting a lot more experimental during this time with production. It's too bad half the people didn't know what they were doing. Now, we talked about the story they were trying to get over with Luger and Rich. They brought in Tommy Rich and basically shoehorned him directly into the US title hunt, which I don't think a lot of people were really stoked for to begin with. I mean, again, you're talking about a guy that was a big star in his own right at one point, but that was in front of a whole different crowd during a whole different era. And while, yes, they were in the Carolinas for this Clash event, Tommy Rich never really spent a whole lot of time, if any, wrestling in the Carolinas back in the 70s. I mean, he was primarily wrestling in Georgia and Tennessee during his peak years. So whatever fans he may have still had in 1989, I don't think they were going to be at the Carolina Coliseum. But they still had a really solid outing here. I like the story of Luger getting frustrated early on when he kept getting out-wrestled by Tommy. And that kind of works into the original idea that Luger went in underestimating Rich and saw him as a pushover. Then things turned around for Luger eventually when he took over. Gave Rich the opportunity to sell for a bit. You eventually get Tommy hitting Luger with the Thez press, but Luger slips out under the bottom rope before 3. And then Rich accidentally punches the ring post, which prevented him from using his right hand in the closing minute. And as he had Luger in a sleeper on the apron, you see Luger drape Rich over the rope's throat first and pin him while his foot was still under the bottom rope. So the heel still had to cheat to win, which is a good heat tactic. Yeah, you can absolutely tell this is a buffer program just to keep Luger busy. I think the bigger story here is the simple fact that Luger's heel run is rapidly running out of steam. The people just naturally want to cheer him right now. Same thing kind of happened in '87 right before he split from the Horsemen. I mean, he had so many people warming up to Luger as he was getting over his personality on camera more. And I've said before, I always preferred heel Luger over babyface Luger. To me, he just works so much more naturally as a snobby, pompous dirtbag. But I can also see why people wanted to like him. He was a very good athlete and had a lot of babyface-like qualities to his look and presentation. As we'll see in the coming year, their hands were kind of tied when they had to make a decision about turning Luger face. Didn't happen in the most organic way, but they eventually circled back to babyface Luger. Then it tanked because the company totally lost the plot afterwards. And Flair quit the booking committee, which certainly did not help. Anyway, remember that whole thing I mentioned earlier about not trying to belabor the card? Well, I lied. Well, let's talk about the main event. What the Clash of Champions Fall Brawl was really centered around. So all throughout the show, there were rumblings about some issues circulating in Gary Hart's faction. He was doing multiple interviews with Gordon Solie, trying to ensure that nothing was wrong and everything was in place for the main event. That wasn't until we learned moments before the match that Terry Funk was in the hospital after a recent surgery to his arm. He had the classic shot where Funk's in the hospital bed with his right arm in a giant cast, saying that he nearly had his arm amputated after being brutally assaulted by Ric Flair in a branding iron. But he assured us that he will be in the building, and he will get his hands on Flair. And boy, he wasn't kidding. So that explained how we got Dick Slater substituting for Funk in the match. It's Slater and Muta versus Sting and Flair. Sort of an unprecedented moment in WCW. Seeing Sting and Flair team up together as babyfaces. After all that shit they put each other through in the previous year. The two men that headlined the very first Clash in March of '88 for the World Heavyweight title. 45-minute Broadway. And here we are a year later and they're teaming up to battle the opposition. It is kind of a shame that Sting and Flair never really got to work together as a long-term babyface tag team because they were a pretty good unit together. And it wasn't even so much about their chemistry as a tag team when it came to double team offense or anything they did in the ring. They were like a super team. The two top babyfaces coming together to fight a common enemy. And it wasn't Hogan Savage, but sort of in that same vein. And it was so effortless to get the people behind them here. And I thought Muta and Slater were the perfect upper mid-card dance partners to help get that over. Dick Slater was comically over the top with his selling during this match. It wasn't quite Shawn Michaels overselling like he did in that match with Hogan, but it was still very much cartoony at times. I'm not going to give him a hard time, though, because With a match as chaotic and exciting as this was, hey, I can get behind Slater here wanting to make the most out of it. And there's a lot to say about it. Not exclusively talking about the plastic bag angle at the end. I mean, this match is a fucking spectacle, but it was a spectacle in the sense that there was an energy to this match that we really have not seen in WCW for a very long time. And I'm mostly referring to the way the crowd got into it. And this brought me back to a lot of those classic house show tapes from 86, 87, like even moments of 88 when the people were just screaming their heads off for virtually everything. And yes, that had to do with a lot of the overbooked nature of so many of those main event matches. But this had a lot of those elements. And I'm not going to single out every last detail here, but everything about this flowed so well. I like to call it controlled chaos because, you know, it wasn't just random pandemonium where you couldn't follow the action and nothing made sense. Everything made sense here, but it also happened at a rapid-fire pace to give it a sense of urgency and unpredictability, which is the kind of thing you want to see in a wrestling match. I mean, beyond the whole structure of the babyface flurry, heat, babyface comeback, etc., it was still broken up with the heels turning things back in their favor when the babyfaces were trying to regain the advantage. You'll take, for example, the spot where Gary Hart comes in with a roll of coins and smashes it over Sting's head. Normally, people would consider that a setup for the heat finish. But then Sting kicked out at 2, and the match continued. I also loved how they explained Tommy Young noticing the coins being sprawled out all over the ring. Gary Hart goes up to him and goes, "Yeah, somebody in the crowd threw the coins in there." Fucking genius cover. So they're going back and forth. It's very hard-hitting four-way action. But the real turning point happens when Sting goes to grab Muta and hoist him into the ring by his throat. That's when Muta spits the mist into Sting's eyes. And Sting goes down to sell on the floor as the heels double-team Flair and stomp a mud hole in his ass. Somewhere during the brawl, Tommy Young also goes down, which opened the door for Terry Funk to run out with a plastic bag. And he does the unthinkable. He takes that bag and puts it over Flair's head, cutting off the airway. And this is always one of those instances where you hear so many people talk about the plastic bag incident, but rarely do people ever talk about the angle itself and the whole absurdity over how the company got in so much hot water over it. When you actually look at how everything was executed here, it's ridiculous to ever think that the company got in trouble for this. It is totally apparent that Flair is fully capable of breathing here. I mean, you can even see him holding the bag up with his hand so he has a clear path to at least inhale and exhale properly. It's not like Funk was trying to tie a fucking Windsor's knot around the bag, which would have legitimately killed the guy. So the whole blow-up over the whole thing is absolutely ridiculous. You had the heels mangling Sting's knee with a branding iron right before they cut to break. And we did not get a clear-cut finish here. Or actually, I lied. It technically would go down as a disqualification. But of course, they come back and you see everybody hovering over Flair's unconscious body. Medical staff is trying to revive him. You got Pillman and Sting out there as moral support. I also need to stress just how phenomenal the commentary was for this match. Corny and Ross were impeccable calling the action here. Just making everything sound and look so authentic. And it is the kind of stuff that you watch here that gave WCW those pockets of hope. Even with really cynical fans during the time. The ones that were rubbed the wrong way and sort of became disgruntled with the bad booking and the silliness of the product. The problem with this particular angle is that it got so much heat on the company that it wound up backfiring in a negative way. Because it basically prevented them from ever doing anything like this again. And this was truly one of the last great heat-seeking angles that we would see on a professional wrestling show in a very long time. One that you could actually believe in. And again, who's to blame in the grand scheme of things? I mean, they knew this would piss off the fans. They just didn't think it would piss them off to such an extent that the higher-ups in Turner would say, well, we can't have stuff like this air on television. It's not camera-friendly. It's not politically correct. No, we need to tone down the violence and make it suitable for a TV audience. And that right there was the nail in the coffin for the wrestling industry. Now, I still love going back and watching this footage in its entirety, but it also comes with its share of downfalls. That's why I love when Jim Cornette brings up the whole joke about canceling gratuitous violence on a wrestling program, all about gratuitous violence. Because it is ridiculous. It's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. How the fuck are you going to sell tickets if you can't do anything to generate a pissed off audience that wants to see a good guy get even? You see, they never thought about those long-term ramifications. It was all about temporary damage control. Completely polar opposite understandings of how and what the wrestling business was. You had one party that knew how to run and operate an effective wrestling promotion, and the other was filled with nothing but corporate suits focusing on ethical standards and practices. Imagine which team wound up getting the final say. Anyway, I think I'm ready to talk about some Midsouth wrestling and try to keep the positive momentum going. It was certainly going to be hard to top the contract signing angle last week, but they also left us with some awaited follow-up this week. Try to get a clearer picture on what the punishment would be for the Midnight's cheap shotting the Fantastics and trying to weasel out of having to defend their Mid-South tag belts. So they re-aired the tape and showed the beatdown angle to refresh everybody's memories. It was the chair shot heard around the nation from Beautiful Bobby. My God, that chair shot still rings in my ears. Fucking brutal. Now, we were supposed to get more definitive answers on what the title situation would be, but instead, we had Jim Cornette in a pre-tape talking about how he's going to be meeting with his lawyers to try to erase the fine being thrown at the Midnights for Bobby using the chair in the Fantastics the other week. And here's a loophole that Corny's trying to work around. Yes, Mid-South instituted a rule about banning the use of chairs, but those rules were only in place during a sanctioned wrestling bout, and if those weapons were brought in from outside the confines of the ring. And since the chairs were already in the ring as part of the official contract signing, plus there was no sanctioned match going on at the time, technically the Midnights cannot be held liable for using a chair in the Fantastics. So that's his argument, and he's got a valid case. Got to admit. It's what you hate to see. He's also going to be suing the entire Midsouth Corporation for prejudice, because apparently they're responsible for him having to wear a mask to cover his bald head, which we aren't supposed to know about in kayfabe as of this point. So that's the current drama amidst the Midnight's Fantastics program. More attorneys and more lawsuits being thrown in the way. And all the while, Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton are dealing with a possible concussion. But we got bigger fish to fry, right? I would call it tasteless, but that's probably a more appropriate way to describe the next thing that aired. Honestly, even calling it tasteless is a bit of a stretch. I just call it bitter resentment. Now Bill Watts is openly looking for any rationale to try to further bury the dog on television, despite the fact that he's gone. You are not going to convince me that this was not deliberately done out of spite. So the new thing in Mid-South is Hacksaw Butch Reed calling himself the King of the Hill. He's out to prove that he's the toughest and baddest in the entire region. And so they aired some old footage of Reed training at the gym when he was still feuding with JYD earlier in the year. And of course, they have to show footage of Dog here. So what did they break out from the old tape library? Well, naturally, you go with the angle from ages ago when Reed dumped the bucket of yellow paint on Dog's back. Because that wasn't symbolic in any way, right? That doesn't send a message. Yeah, we're totally not doing this to showcase how yellow and cowardly JYD is for walking out of the company without notice. Not in the slightest. Please. But it did tie in with Butch Reed's in-ring segment this week. He was originally supposed to wrestle Brickhouse Brown, or as Reed noted here, Outhouse Brown. Savage nickname. And we did not get Brickhouse. Instead, he was confronted by a mystery, unidentified black man with a heavily taped right hand. All the while, Bill Watts is having an open orgasm admiring the physical nature of this man. So he gets in the ring and pretty much disposes of Butch Reed in about 90 seconds. Lays him out with the right hand. Drops him like a bad habit. And we eventually come to learn after break that this mystery man goes by the name of Master G, aka George Wells. Here's what he explained. He turned down a $5,000 contract up in MSG to work for Vince. He spoke firsthand with JYD before coming down to the Mid-South area. Apparently Butch Reed has the dog afraid to even step foot in Mid-South again. But Master G is here to whoop some booty and, this is a direct quote, work his way down the card. I did not stutter. He said he was going to start with Reed and work his way down the card. So I guess he's gearing up for that Barn Burner Classic with Art fucking Cruz at some point. One would presume. Or whoever we consider the worst job guy in the area. I mean, overall, there's not a whole lot to say about the promo itself. His delivery was okay. He wasn't a blazing personality, but I mean, he got over what he needed to here. Now, we talked about George Wells recently when we were drawing comparisons to all the black babyfaces Watts was bringing in to try to whitewash the dog from history, just like they were trying to do with Brickhouse. Same goes with Master G. Spoiler, he did not last all that long in the Midsouth territory. He wound up going back to work for Vince by the end of the year, if I'm not mistaken. To be honest with you, it was not much of a loss. I remember Master G vividly. He was nothing to write home about, I assure you. And if this promo didn't give you enough indication, just wait until you see him wrestle. He was slightly better than Sonny King, which is really not saying a whole lot. So then we got a hype package for the Fantastics, which I was a little nervous about considering the last hype video they aired with Bobby and Tommy. The one where they got physically molested by women on camera. And this one was a lot tamer, although it still had some questionable clips. I like the one shot of Tommy Rogers doing the backflip into the pole. But of course, Joel liked to play around with all the effects to spice up the color schemes. Of all colors to choose, he went with dark green to show the water. Looked like Tommy doing a backflip into a cesspool of raw sewage. I was also mildly grossed out by having to look at Tommy and Bobby in skin-tight Speedos. They were exposing quite the package, if you know what I mean. By the way, Tommy Rogers doing leg presses with half-naked Bobby Fulton on the machine. Gay. Not going to sugarcoat it. But they also had a squash with Dale Veazey and Don Sanders. They both had their foreheads taped up from the beating last week. And the chair shot of doom. But you know, they certainly worked here like they were in moderately okay condition. After having been concussed and damn near decapitated the other week. They were very aggressive here, which you would expect given the nature of what happened the other week. Wouldn't say they were in the mood to have a sportsman-like wrestling contest. Although we still got a handful of hip thrusts from Bobby Fulton, so he was still trying to have a good time. The match definitely went longer than you would expect. Not that the jobbers really got in any offense, they didn't. But Bobby and Tommy just took a long time to beat them up and do their thing. But Tommy eventually got the win after coming off with a big splash. It was mentioned here that the Rock and Roll Express would soon be making their return to Mid-South. So now Cornette's going to have more than one major issue to deal with, especially when it comes to pissed off tag teams. He was boasting about running off Ricky and Robert a few weeks ago. Looks like that might come back to bite him. From there, we had Hercules Hernandez and Hacksaw Duggan being aired on tape delay. And this was significant in the sense that it helped to explain the story of why Cornette was wearing the lucha mask for the last several appearances. Even though I've directly spoiled it by letting the cat out of the bag immediately. Not that it was all that shocking. It was a hair versus hair match at the Municipal Auditorium in Nashville. But there was also a twist, because in addition to the hair stipulation, they also assigned Dr. Death to be the special guest referee. And that was kind of odd when you consider that Dr. Death had been a heel for the past some odd weeks. And he's been going around trying to claim that all the babyfaces are cowards because they refuse to get in the ring and fight him for his football helmet. So, seemingly we were supposed to believe that out of the goodness of his heart, for no apparent reason, he was going to show up and be an impartial referee for this match and allegedly turn face from out of the blue. With absolutely zero build-up. Something tells me we were being played. Now, looking past that momentarily, we picture the tape where JC got done powdering Duggan. Keep in mind, this is a no disqualification match, so Corny couldn't get fined or DQ'd for throwing the powder in Duggan's eyes. So as they're having the match and Williams seems to be calling everything right down the middle, we get to the spot where Duggan catches Hercules with a spear tackle, and he goes for the cover, and Williams counts 1, he counts 2, and to the shock of absolutely nobody, swerve, bitch. Williams drops the elbow on Duggan's back and throws Hercules on top of him for the 1, 2, 3. So the babyface got fucked. And now everybody's blown a gasket because, well, now the people have to see Duggan get his head shaved. Or so it would seem. Speaking of swerves, this next part was so fantastic. So there's a huge jump cut in the tape right after you see Hercules and Cornette gloating in the ring. And Dr. Death by that point had basically fucked off and left. He got his money from Corny. His business was done. So the next thing you see is a handful of babyfaces in the ring disposing of Hercules while Duggan reaches out and grabs Cornette to tackle him. And now Cornette knows he's fucked. All the babyfaces surround the ring to prevent Hercules and the Midnights from getting in the ring while Cornette's being restrained in the chair and having his hair chopped off. Bill Watts is elated to see this all happening in real time. To directly quote him right before they pitched a break, Cornette, "I'm glad to see you bald." And the angle itself was pretty good. If you ignore the fact that it took like 7 goddamn hours for Duggan to cut off a 1/4 of an inch of hair. Seriously, it is the most laughable trope in all of wrestling. Every single time there is a hair stipulation booked, nothing ever goes right. It's a curse. There's always something that gets screwed up. The clippers are dull. The razor blade is dull. The electric razor doesn't work. The guy doing the hair cutting is slower than molasses. It never ceases to amaze me how badly they butchered the hair stipulation in wrestling over the years. 9 times out of 10, it's an epic fail. But it gave everybody a chance to mock and ridicule Cornette. Lord knows people have been waiting to do that for a while, given how much he and the Midnights have gotten over on the babyfaces as of late. So then we come back for Dr. Death and Hercules versus Johnny Mantell and Steve Miller. I guess what you would call the designated standby for the week. But again, this is accounting for the story they're doing with Dr. Death working hand in hand with Cornette. Now that he's in his back pocket for reinforcement. So they wanted to get him and Hercules in a match together to keep establishing that unit. I wrote this down in all caps, and I meant every word of it. Fucking Johnny Mantell. This fucking asshole. He had to get his shit in. His sole purpose was to go out there and be the designated prelim guy to help get over Williams and Hercules. But this stupid mother humper had to get himself over at the expense of the two monster heels that they were just trying to establish in the previous segment. Made me furious. Enraged. I've had my fair share of complaints about the over-excessive push of Johnny Mantell in World Class. At least I could reasonably see how that would happen, given that Ken Mantell was booking when Johnny was still a prelim guy. After seeing him stiff Hercules and do everything in his power to avoid get taken off his feet by these two, this is where I officially turned on him and said, this guy can lick the hairiest, dirtiest part of my testicles. I could not believe what I was witnessing here. Watching Hercules and Dr. Death bump for this jagoff like he was fucking Ricky Morton. I mean, he's out there throwing drop kicks and ducking and dodging offense left and right. Doing everything to avoid getting leveled by these two guys. And of course, his partner's a complete no-name job guy. So Johnny just tags him in and the guy immediately gets destroyed. That was how Johnny got out of having a bump in this match. And or doing a job. He just went out there, did a 2-minute babyface flurry, and just left his partner in there to get pummeled and killed. I hate this man with a passion. I used to think I was giving him a hard time in World Class. I am now completely vindicated in my assertion that this guy is the most self-conceited, ostentatious douchebag of all time. The guy that used to work opening card matches on Dallas TV to radio fucking silence most weeks. He's out here on Midsouth television thinking he's the second coming of Terry Taylor or Magnum TA. Christ almighty. The next time I see Johnny Mantell in a ring, he better be getting annihilated in 10 seconds by Hacksaw Reed. Elsewise, I might boycott every Johnny Mantell segment from here on out. This was baffling to me. I could not believe he got away with this. Am I overreacting? Probably. Do I give a shit? No. Not after this performance. You want the cold hard truth? I think Dr. Death and Hercules should have stiffed him. Teach him a lesson on how to actually get somebody over properly, instead of trying to get your lame ass shit in. Such an infuriating ending to the show. Even the rock and roll video package couldn't help save it for me. That last 5 minutes with having to watch Hercules and Dr. Death sell for Johnny mid-card Mantell, that just ruined my entire week. But hey, in completely unrelated news, at least we know Magnum TA is still alive as of this taping. He actually made a cameo in that Municipal Auditorium tape with Cornette getting his head shaved. Now, he's still not on the regular syndicated shows, but we at least know the North American champion still exists. Which is good to know. It's always nice to know that your top world champion is alive and well. Now, the next feasible step would be to get him on the fucking show. I'm sweating right now. My face is turning B-red. Probably a clear sign that my blood pressure's high and should end the show right there. Now, again, we do not have an episode of World Class to talk about this week, so it's another relatively unorthodox Friday episode, but it's still a decent length, so we'll go with that. And on that note, we will reconvene on Monday for In Your House 10 as well as Retro Raw. Hopefully by that point I'll have new internet service and be all set up in my new place to get some recordings going. I think I'm also going to be staying at a hotel over the next couple nights just to give myself time to get settled in. So I might also do some recording there too. Try to use the free Wi-Fi. In any case, I'll catch you guys on Monday, and I think that'll be it for now. Take care, all. Peace out.